All our speakers here.
Hey, Assalamualaikum, Anza, Adnan here.
Walaikum salam.
Let me turn the video on.
Thank you.
Assalamualaikum.
Walaikum salam. Hope you're doing well. So today we're going to be, for this panel discussion, talking about the impact of AI in Pakistan. So let me introduce my esteemed panel, Mr. Qazafi Qayyum. He's the CEO of Analytics. Mr. Adnan Yousuf, he's the COO at Analytics. Mr. Adnan Zaidi, the CEO at Proxima. And Mr. Ehsan, the CEO of TFS. Right, welcome to the show, gentlemen. And I'm so glad that you all could be here. So my first question then, let's begin with my very esteemed panelist, Mr. Adnan Kazi. So, sir, now with regards to AI, we keep hearing a lot about, artificial intelligence and machine learning these days. So to the layman, what AI looks like right now to a millennial like myself is probably that what we see on legacy devices or things like Amazon Alexa or maybe some recommendations online. But what I want to know is, where did the advent of AI in Pakistan, where and when did it begin?
Thank you very much, Anza. First of all, thank you for having all of us over. Looking forward to a very meaningful session today. So yes, your question has two parts actually. So in a very simplistic term, what AI is, and then how the advent of AI happened in Pakistan. So what's the history? Is it new? Is it just a hype, or is it something real? Right? Is that correct? That's what your question is. Great, thank you. So in very simple terms, like artificial intelligence is no more a buzzword. It is real, pretty real, and people are benefiting from it. Corporates are benefiting from it, and it's all about instilling the properties and the traits and the characteristics that human beings have. Like we can listen, we can comprehend, we can talk, we can make good decisions based on the events that are happening, around us on day-to-day basis. If you try to instill these qualities into computer machines and computer systems, we can easily say that these machines and computer systems are getting artificially intelligent. So that's the crux of what AI is at a very high level, obviously. But most recently, what we have seen is that when we talk about AI and when we share the use cases of AI, especially in the corporate sector, be it telecommunication industry, financial or other industries, we have seen that people are exaggerating the use cases as well, right? And that's because of the lack of data, because of the lack of organizational maturity, because of lack of other things as well. The use cases have not been implemented to the extent or to the level where they can actually start, replacing human beings or work at par with what the human intelligence is, right? And that is where the lack of trust comes in, because when people like us, when we try to rely upon the artificial intelligent models and systems, when we don't get that value out of it, so that is where the lack of trust comes in, and that's why people say that AI is probably a buzzword and not something real. But gradually things are getting there. As far as the advent is concerned, I think Pakistan adopted AI maybe close to 2 decades ago. I mean, 15 years ago. Telecommunications sector was the first one to embark upon such initiatives, and we all know that one of the biggest challenges that the telcos have faced 15 years ago, even when there was so much competition, was the churn, customer churning. Like it was so easy to buy a 100 rupees SIM or maybe a 50 rupees SIM and switch over to another telecommunication operator, right? So that was one of the biggest problems for the telcos. And churn prediction was one of the early use cases of machine learning that the telecommunication companies adopted. And I think they've actually realized a lot of value from these models, AI models like churn prediction, cross sell, upsell. So it's not something new in Pakistan. The reason I'm just sharing, stressing upon the challenges and the lack of value that has been driven from these initiatives is because yes, not all the use cases delivered value. Churn prediction was one of the use cases that obviously delivered value, but not all the use cases delivered value. So that's I think that's how we gradually adopted. But if you talk about today, I think somebody needs to mute. There's some background.
Yes, someone needs to mute their mic, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, so if you talk about today, Anza, it's been like 15 years that from the first use case, early use case that I mentioned. If you talk about today, I think we have matured. So there are many industries that are really benefiting from the value that the machine learning and artificial intelligence solutions are bringing on the table for them, or maybe other industries. I can still
Right, absolutely. I think Mr. Mohammed Ehsan Khan, sir, I request you to mute your mic, please.
It's not my mic, it's,
Right.
I think, Global Digital Summit's mic that's open.
I'll
That needs to be closed here.
just have them done. Thank you very much. Now, my next question is for Mr. Qazafi Qayyum. Sir, you have been one of the pioneers of AI in Pakistan. I would like to know that, Mr. Adnan Kazi mentioned something very interesting about how, you know, uh, telecommunication plays a big role in AI. Now, when we talk about smartphones, right, everyone has a smartphone. It is often believed that as your phones are getting smarter, people are becoming less smart because, there's so much more that's automated. What is your take on it with your experience in telecommunication, AI, and what can we see in the future?
Right. Thank you, Anza. It's a pleasure being here today with you guys. Look, I think in terms of where we're seeing AI heading, it's going to revolutionize the way that we see ourselves on a daily basis, right? So you talked about telecommunication, yes, because they're primarily technology-based, organizations, which rely a lot on the data which is being generated and how they can manipulate that data. It's easier for them to be the early adopters in almost all the initiatives around technology. AI is no different. Adnan talked about some of the use cases which telecoms data undertake both globally and in Pakistan. But I think, when you talk about the humans getting less smarter, that's not true because AI will always complement the human intelligence. In most of the fields that you talk about AI today, it should be talked about as augmented intelligence rather than artificial intelligence. So, for example, if you talk about healthcare, where the AI is being used for predicting the presence or absence of particular disease like cancer or the absence or presence of a stroke, that is not going to replace the opinion or the consultation of doctors. What it's going to do is complement the prescription or diagnosis of doctors and give an additional data point. And what this eventually helps you do is scale at large. Because if you talk about globally, the doctor to patient ratio, that is so high that, for most of the population, especially in remote areas, it's virtually impossible to have access to good doctors in terms of getting healthcare advice or opinions. So I think it's going to definitely revolutionize the way that we see the world operating today. But by no means it means that the human is getting less smarter. It does mean that humans have an additional responsibility in terms of how AI is adopted across the corporate world and across governments. Because, I think if you talk about governments, they have a dual responsibility, both in terms of adoption of AI within their functioning, and then how they facilitate the market at large in terms of adoption of AI. And, it's similar in Pakistan as well. I think, the government has to look at how they can facilitate the corporate, both in terms of legislation, and we can deep dive into this part maybe subsequently in this session. But in most of the fields that you talk about AI replacing humans, there needs to be a lot of legislation in terms of what is right and what is wrong, what is the ethical, what is non-ethical, and those are questions which are real. It's not only which Pakistan needs to figure out; it's what globally governments need to figure out and corporates need to figure out in terms of how AI can definitely benefit the common man. So, yes, I think the revolution is real. We're past the hype. It's not a bad thing necessarily, where organizations are trying to use this hype for their differentiation in the marketplace, as long as they are actually, then going out and trying to commercialize or monetize that AI idea or use case to benefit the business. If it's just being used as a technology project, then there's no real value for the organization itself.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Now, Dr. Ehsan, I was reading an article yesterday about the future of work, right? And some of the jobs that are anticipated in 2025 and 2050 are jobs like data detective, ethical sourcing manager, extinct species revivalist, AI specialist, so on and so forth. Now, the future looks interesting, but it also makes one wonder what will happen to the future of work when you have AI taking over.
I think one thing that Qazafi mentioned very clearly is that it will always be an augmented environment of working. Some job responsibilities will evolve. I mean, even now, when you look at certain systems, a lot of analysis is already being done by systems, which was previously being done by individuals. So that evolution will take place. However, you'll need people who will have to sort of grasp on these technologies, learn those technologies. So eventually you will have people in one form or the other. So a typical work environment would look like a place where data-driven jobs will still be done by systems. However, you will need those experts to analyze the data coming out of it and then making decisions out of it. So it will remain augmented for a very long time. This is what I believe. I think one thing that has to be understood is the availability of data to develop these AI-based systems. And I think that's a very key part that we need to look at. Because if you pick up telcos or medical or healthcare or even trade tech, the key challenge is getting that data on board. And we talk a lot about AI, but I think a lot of systems that we call AI right now are more into machine learning driven systems. I mean, true AI will come in when we have the right kind of data sets available, the volume of data, the understanding of how AI is implemented. And I think Adnan was mentioning that a lot of use cases that have been sort of unsuccessful till this point of time is because of the understanding behind the use case itself. And we say, okay, this is an AI use case, but whereas it was not, I mean, the data was not available, the systems were not ready. And then eventually it all comes down to the point where people say, oh, it was a problem with the technology itself, but whereas the challenges was not a clear use case being available, data not being available, technology is there, but if you don't have all the components in place, it will always be an unsuccessful element towards AI. So going back to your original question, I think AI will evolve. It will become more useful for people. The jobs will not be gone. It will, I would call it, it will be replaced. Replaced as in like you would have to do something else, and systems will help you do that.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Is Mr. Adnan Zaidi with us? I don't think he's...
Not yet, Anza. He's joining in shortly.
Right, no worries. So my next question is obviously going to be for Mr. Adnan Kazi. So, with all the conversation that we've had so far, we have come to the realization that Pakistan is on the nexus of the next big thing in AI and machine learning and everything. But obviously, one of the important points that Mr. Mohammed Ehsan raised was the fact that we're lacking data. But I work with a UK-based edtech, which what we're trying to do these days in Pakistan is try to, help the public sector of education improve and then out of school children as well. And we've realized that a lot of local servers don't even have the bandwidth to take the amount of users or the data sets that we're going to have. What do you think is the solution for that?
I think, Anza, that really depends upon the kind of use case that you're trying to achieve with the public sector, right? AI has many use cases for the public sector, and specifically talking about the education sector, which you have just mentioned briefly, is an amazing target market to really benefit from the use cases of artificial intelligence and machine learning. The challenge that you mentioned, lack of data or the lack of processing power, is obviously a very, very realistic challenge to be mentioned here. And there are solutions available, right? So I'll give an example. If you have an idea of giving public sector, education sector a boost or really an improvement through the power of AI, and specifically talking of the computer vision branch, right? CV, which is computer vision. You need higher processing power. In these days, we have got GPUs available. We have got global clouds available, which can really cater to the high powered processing needs of the computer vision use cases that you want to enable with the public sector. Similarly, even if you want to go and embark upon the use cases which are non-computer vision based, other ML based use cases, even in that case, you've got the right processing speeds, right infrastructure, and available. So to me, challenge is really not the infrastructure availability or the processing speed availability or the overall cloud-based architectures availability. The challenge really lies in what you mentioned briefly is the lack of data, and what Ehsan mentioned as well as the lack of understanding. These two things combined can be disastrous for these use cases. I'll let you know why. So the point you mentioned, lack of data, even Stephen was mentioned earlier today that data is the oil, is the fuel to train the use case, right? If you don't have the data, you can't really train the use case. And if you can't train the use case, the outcome of the AI model will be rubbish, basically. So you won't be able to drive any value out of it. It will be, basically a garbage in, garbage out situation that you'll be stuck in, right? So you need, Qazafi mentioned some medical use cases of AI. So for instance, if you want
yes,
to...
we'd like for him to elaborate on those later on as well, sir. So
yeah,
yes.
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, looking forward to that. So if you want to really predict the probability of a human being having a cancer of a particular type, right, through computer vision imagery, through MRIs, through CT scans, you can't train that model if you don't have ample amount of CT scans and MRI with both positives and negatives marked and labeled, right? So that is the problem that is causing the lack of trust in the AI, because you don't train the AI models enough for them to be accurate in terms of their predictions and in terms of their probabilistic assignments, which doesn't happen. And the outcome is the human beings and the doctors and whoever are the business users or the users of those models, they get stuck into a situation where they say, okay, I'm not going further on this. I'm not investing any more time on AI models. I know what to do. I've been doing this for decades now, and I will tell if the cancer is existent or not in a particular scan. And the second point that Ehsan mentioned was actually the lack of knowledge, lack of understanding of the use case. This lack of certainty around the use case is, again, I think, the second most biggest problem that we're facing, or the challenge that we're facing. And I'll give you an example. Stephen was mentioning that government of Punjab and government of Malaysia and government of Singapore, they have been really using the data and intelligence and AI models to actually predict the likelihood of a disease coming out and spreading, and then taking appropriate measures beforehand to actually mitigate the risk of disease being spreading across the globe, as well across a particular country or a city, right? Now imagine that if the government or the public sector people and the private sector people, they don't understand the use case and they don't understand how machine learning works, right? And if they don't train the model rightly without having the proper understanding, imagine how big of a disaster would it be that you productionize that model and start taking decisions related to dengue, related to coronavirus, related to other pandemics as well, based on that untrained or mistrained AI models. It will be a disaster, right? So lack of understanding of the problem statement that you're trying to solve here, and the preparation of the data, these two things go hand in hand. If you have a problem here, the outcome of the AI model will be a disaster, right? So I think you rightly mentioned by Dr. Ehsan as well and yourself as well, I think, and Qazafi briefly touched upon that as well, that if you really want to productionize AI models and drive value out of such initiatives, you need to overcome these two challenges that we are facing right
Absolutely, but I'm sorry, but I'm just going to make a very brief comment on this. You did mention that we need to have more a better understanding of the data. Are we working enough on our academia, and are you, industry leaders making that kind of effort? Because see, we're here today, and probably 10, 20 years down the line, we will need better understanding of data, and we'll need better people who understand data even better. What initiatives are being taken on that front? Mr. Qazafi, Qayyum, like to answer that, please.
Yeah, sure. And so before I talk about this, I think just adding to what Dr. Ehsan and Adnan were talking about, I think something very interesting which Gartner talks about in their latest hype cycle report around AI. They highlight this trend about the lack of data for various AI initiatives as of today. But they also talk about the fact that moving forward, there are organizations which are trying to work on using small data, which they call, where data is not available in terms of the size of the data, and they talk about wide data, where although the set of data is small, but in terms of the breadth or the value it holds, that is wide. So, this is something which organizations are trying to tackle these days in terms of how they can make AI models more effective with the challenges which both Dr. Ehsan and Adnan talked about. Coming to your point around, the academia, I think there are some good things happening in pockets, but we need to do a lot more. Starting off with the fact that we need to train our youth that, don't get bogged down by the hype which AI presents. The titles are jazzy. Everybody wants to be a data scientist these days because that is where the money lies. So it's not a bad thing. But what is important is that they understand what are the skill sets which they require in terms of being successful either in Pakistan or globally, right? So I think that is where academia needs to play their part. And obviously the corporate sector needs to share their feedback as well. A lot of misconception around the skill sets which are required for a good data scientist. Most people think that it's technical skill set, and that is furthest from the truth as possible. Rather, it's skills like statistical modeling, statistics, mathematics, good knowledge of data manipulation, and then maybe some programming skills as well. But programming is not the number one skill set which is required to be a good data scientist.
Brilliant. That's news to us. Right. Go on.
Right.
I just wanted to ask you. Right.
Sure.
Please finish what you had to say. But there's an interesting insight that I would like for you to share.
Sure. So when we talk about what are the elements or traits of a good data scientist, I think we're trying to paint a picture of a unicorn. They are difficult to find. And then, they're difficult to retain. Monetary value alone will not keep a data scientist, a good data scientist, interested. You need to continuously challenge him in terms of the work which is available, the use cases which he or she is working on. And that is what will help you retain good data scientists. So I think, the academia, they need to come up with more disciplined programs around data science and AI. I know some top universities are either already embarking on such initiatives or programs. Some are work is in progress. But at the same time, I think the government needs to play their part as well. The good thing is, we see a lot of talk from the government in terms of the president taking an initiative around AI. That's in place. But I think a lot more needs to
What are
go
your
in.
policy recommendations, Mr. Qazafi Qayyum? So what are your
Sorry?
policy recommendations? Everyone keeps saying that, there need to be more steps taken, but since, you have a lot of experience and insight into Pakistan as well. So I want to know, that you mentioned this earlier as well, that the government needs to do more. What are your policy recommendations for them? At least maybe like 3 top priorities for the future.
Right. So from my perspective, the first thing is the education in terms of separating the hype from the actual ground reality. Right. So giving vision in terms of what the youth should expect in terms of a professional career within the AI or data science space, that is the top priority. So, if for example, a student is not from an aptitude perspective well aligned from a data science career, I think he needs to understand that from day one, because he might in the end be able to get his degree. But data science and AI is something that needs to be people need to be very passionate about, because it's not something that will be the same day in day out. It has a lot of diversification, and that will only come from the passion that the individual holds. Secondly, I think in terms of the programs itself, the quality of the programs, that is where the universities, the academia need to play their part and come up with programs which are recognizable and which can be associated by all the top universities across the globe, so that our students are not ending up with a shorter draw in terms of the straw. And last but not least, getting feedback from the corporate in terms of what are the exact job specifications, the skill sets, and the roles which are expected in the next 3 to 5 years in the AI space. That is something which needs to go in from the corporate side as well. So a combination of these three main things should be able to put us on the right track. Obviously, there's a lot more. It's trying to trivialize a complex problem to solve. But I think these three would put us well on the way in terms of getting there.
Thank you, Mr. Qazafi. I'm glad our country has, people like you who are so dedicated. But my next question to you, Mr. Dr. Ehsan, is that, a lot of times in Pakistan, we've seen that there are a lot of companies that do want to innovate, and there are a lot of AI-based solutions available. But the problem time and time again is the financial side of things, right? So even if we talk about, let's say, the education or the health sector, where you talk about wearable devices, or in schools when you talk about iPads, what happens is that finance becomes a problem because we don't have enough resources. And we've seen a lot of potential in AI in terms of financial modeling internationally, and the different, investment models that are available as well. How do you see the evolution of AI in finance in the Pakistan context in particular? Thank you.
So if I'm trying, I'll try to first understand your question. You're saying that the availability of funds for developing such products or implementation of AI in finance? What's the question?
Sir, can the implementation of AI in the financial sector, or in better loan schemes, or in terms of,
All right. Okay, got it.
or even payment methods, like we've seen Kist Pay come up, right?
Okay.
So where can AI play its part in all of this?
I think so. It's in direct correlation with the project that we're currently doing in Malaysia. I'll not call it an AI project. It's more machine learning, because I really don't want to brand everything AI at this point of time. The point and what we're doing over there is with the taxation department, they're trying to figure out people based on the data available with the right kind of with the exact or aligned attributes, people who will not be able to pay the tax, or who will not pay taxes in the next 5 years, who are paying right now. So a lot of these cases can be and will be used in Pakistan. If you look at the financial sector specifically, I think when the attributes of people are available, and I think that this goes back to our point where we're talking about data availability and the use case itself and how the model should be designed. One of the implementations that clearly is there is finding out whether a person who's applying is eligible for loan or not, based on what you have seen when it comes to what people have done before in terms of their payments. Another use case would be availability of funds at every branch. So if I go to a particular branch based on the people who are coming there and asking for, let's say if I go and put a check of 10 crore over there, will the funds be available? It really depends on how many people have come over there who have requested this kind of fund, and the availability and the disbursement of cash on every branch. So there are multiple use cases that can be applied in the financial sector: loan defaulters, cash availabilities, plus if you look at AI when it's implementation in the financial sector, one of them is around cyber security as well, evolving infrastructure that can understand, okay, whenever a vulnerability of like this is there, the systems will evolve. So there are multiple use cases, but once again, it goes back to the original point of building the right kind of models. Because when we're doing our PhD, our professor used to say that You can create any model and you can prove anything that you want to. You can correlate anything that you want to, and it would make sense when it comes to data. But is it really applicable? So people should use their mind in that case. Plus, when you're doing this modeling part, what attributes are involved, what data is involved, there are so many factors around it. So I personally am against the idea of branding everything with AI. Okay, AI cannot be applied. When I say cannot be, its applicability should be really, understood. Where the application should happen, what kind of data you have available, what kind of people who are building the model. And I'll go back to Qazafi's point. When you're creating these data scientists, it's not like you can create a data scientist and he knows everything. It should be specific to industries as well. So people who have worked in the financial sector have an understanding of that. They need to have the right kind of research done in that, and then they can come up with these models. Otherwise, you'll have people who can create anything out of data, and data can prove anything. I mean, I can pick up any data set and I would say, okay, while it is day right now, and I would prove that this is night just because the data set says so.
Right. So we need specialists, data scientists who are specialists in, let's say, education, or let's say in healthcare, finance, and so on and so forth.
I think these are the only people who will be able to understand the data itself. Otherwise, I mean, somebody coming from healthcare and trying to analyze data in the telco sector will see the data itself, but he will not be able to understand what's going on, and he'll come up with a wonderful model which would mean nothing actually when it comes to real world.
Absolutely, very valid point made. Mr. Adnan Zaidi, thank you for joining us. I would like to hear your take on the conversation that you've heard so far.
Thank you for having me. Let me introduce a little bit. I'm already engaged with the software development and research in different organizations since 20 years. Then I feel something is changing very rapidly, that is artificial intelligence. Right. So I started learning about it, and what I noticed that the people are working on different domains. As Dr. Ehsan says, that it's more about the data and the type of data. So if we talk about the data scientist, so we must know what kind of data is being handled through that person. One more important part that I'm playing in Pakistan is the representation of Kaggle, which is one of the largest data science portal around the globe. So I'm also creating some awareness among the people. The question you have earlier asked regarding what should be the government do, I would like to answer for it. That first thing is to build awareness among the audience. I mean, awareness among the students, and even sometimes government should try to train the trainers as well. Even we must have some better faculty. They must have a good knowledge of artificial intelligence. They must go abroad and get better training to train the people in Pakistan, right? Similarly, if you talk about data scientists, then we must have a list of data scientists in Pakistan who has to create some impression. They have to create some influence of others as well, right? If you look around the world, the people are already engaged since many years. It's not now. It's not the time in which we are talking today for artificial intelligence and data science. The peoples are already engaged around 5 and 10 years back. So if you talk about government, I would recommend the policy should be start from the awareness, and after awareness, there should be a proper ecosystem for research and development, right? To encourage the people to rebuild and to motivate them. Similarly, the policy must contain some legal values as well. Like as a nation, Pakistan, we are also in top of the crisis in terrorism as well. So artificial intelligence could be a big disaster for us as well. So the government should create some ethical laws. Government should take some initiative right today to control
Absolutely.
automatic equipment.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Very interesting point on ethics, and Mr. Adnan Kazi, last one or two questions. So I would request you to keep it brief. What value should we embed in AI? since Mr. Adnan Zaidi did mention it.
Yeah, so I just want some more clarification on what exactly you're asking. So when you talk about value being embedded, could you please elaborate a bit further so that I can answer accordingly?
Right. So, for instance, because there will be increased human interaction in the future in terms of, legacy devices and wearables and whatnot, and even if we're putting something as sophisticated and as personal as healthcare or education for the future, um, and involving AI so much into it. So, what values do you think we should build into the whole system?
Okay, great. Yeah. So I think your question is more inclined towards if the AI grows and human AI interaction becomes, obviously inevitable in future, obviously, and we are moving in that direction, then what are the ethical values and what are the boundaries that need to be defined so that these systems can coexist? So have I understood it correctly?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah. So basically, it is a subject. Everybody's talking about it, and I mean, global players like Elon Musk and other key players in the AI, area. They have been talking about these values and coexistence of human beings and AI machines and the ethical boundaries that need to be defined. I think this is very important, right? The reason is that if machines are being trained and they keep retraining and they keep growing their capabilities and become more strengthened in terms of what they're doing currently and what they would be able to do 10 years down the road or 20 years down the road, it is very important to define a boundary, right? What is the boundary that you're defining so that these machines do not become a problem for human beings to live in the society, right? And I think in order to do that, it's very important that you actually come up with a policy making framework, come up with the limits that you need to define, which define the ethical implementation of AI, ethical boundaries of AI, and many people are talking about it. So I think one thing that we need to do is that we need to understand that what is the key areas of threats that we need to identify today that we foresee coming up or happening 30 years down the road or 20 years down the road. Once we have identified those possible threats, that is the time we actually start defining and start taking the measures and steps to actually mitigate those threats. I let you know, I was recently listening to one of the great scientists. He's the co-founder of the string theory as well, scientist Kaku. And I was listening to his comments about self-replicating robots in AI, right? And he was mentioning that this could become a big disaster a couple of decades down the road if that happens. What he's thinking, if and there are measures that he's suggesting in terms of how we can put a cap on the self-replicating capability of these AI machines, right? So this is just one example. There are many others as well. But to conclude my comment, I think today is the day that we start thinking of the possible threats and we start taking the appropriate measures at all levels, at academia, government, public sector, private sector, and involving all these big names as well globally to start mitigating these risks that we
Thank
have
you.
potentially.
Thank you. Last question, Mr. Qazafi Qayyum. Sorry, we're running out of time. So when do you think Pakistan will be completely ready to adopt AI?
Thank you. I'll be quick. So from my perspective, Pakistan is ready today. There are two sectors that we primarily are looking at. One is the corporate sector, where you talk about various industries. I think they have a bigger challenge because they have a legacy in terms of how they're used to doing business. So this is going to be a disruption in terms of adoption, and the operationalization of AI, particular use cases in itself, is not something which is easy. So I think the important thing from my perspective is that these corporates need to really think hard and fast. Dr. Ehsan was talking about this in terms of the real value that they want to get out of AI. Because if it is not something which can be monetized in the end, either through customer experience or through revenue generation or cost optimization, in the end, it would be just a technology project. And I think a lot of organizations have fallen into that trap in the recent past with initiatives like data lakes, where it was primarily being driven by technology. It looks good on someone's resume, but from a business perspective, it does not really add any value. The second sector which we need to look at, and I think that is something which is very, very promising from a Pakistan perspective, is the startup sector, where a lot of new business ideas are coming out, which are AI-based, AI-driven, and their impact is not only within Pakistan, their impact is truly global. So I think I'm very excited in terms of where we stand and what the possibilities of adoption of real AI within Pakistan is.
Right. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us today. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. We've got a lot more interesting panels coming up. This is the Digital Summit 2021 by CXO Global.